Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's podcast with me, Gail from Sober Bliss. And today I'm really excited. You can probably tell because I'm here with the absolutely gorgeous Dowsett Johnston. Welcome, Anne. It's so good to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be with you.
I'm really excited for our conversation because, of course, I loved your book. And if anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, do you want to just tell us what your book is so they know who you are?
My book is called Drink, the intimate relationship between women and alcohol. If you're in Britain, it's called the deadly relationship between women and alcohol, which I think is interesting.
Oh, is
Anyway,
it?
yeah, the book the book explores three things. Number one, my own story of falling into the numbing, self-medicating habit of using alcohol to deal with depression, menopause, empty nest, you name it, workaholism,
Mm,
burnout. So it has my story and the very deep fact that I came from a very alcoholic family. So I've always been fascinated with this subject, but what really the book broke in terms of news was the fact that the alcohol market was pinking the market, was really focusing on women because
yeah.
all the Johnny Walker drinkers were dying out and they couldn't figure out
Mm,
how to lure women in the same way. So to look at the closing gender gap of risky drinking with um, not the guy under the bridge with the paper bag, but high functioning women getting into trouble, young women getting into trouble, professional women getting into trouble. So that's my book. It
yeah.
was in one of the top 10 of the year in 10 years ago, 2013.
I
Uh,
know. That's
by the way,
amazing.
it's a long time ago now, but it's actually more relevant than ever. And I'm sad to say, as we open our conversation, that everything I predicted came true. So that's very sad. Women have been closing that gender gap and really getting into trouble with alcohol.
Yeah. Obviously that's why I'm here because that happened to me too. And I'm helping right now many women who are in the same situation. And that's what I wanted to ask you. Well, lots of things. But first of all, you wrote the book 10 years ago, and you've just said that sadly, what you predicted has come true.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that women in, this day and age, intelligent women above all, are still in the same trap as 10 years ago?
Right. What a great question. Um, Probably my favorite subject,
Mm,
um, sadly, is that we live in an alcoholic, alcocentric culture where the dominant messaging is if you want to relax, reward, celebrate, excuse me, you will use
yeah.
alcohol. Um, 80% of Canadians where I live, 15 and over drink. That's a huge proportion of the population. It's legal, it's a drug, but we don't think of it as a drug.
No, we don't.
But I pursued in my book a kind of deeper meaning.
Mm,
And the deeper meaning is that in a culture that tells women that they have to be perfect, perfect at home, perfect at work, perfect raising their children, it is the ideal decompression tool. In other words, I call it the modern woman's steroid, enabling her to do the heavy lifting in a
mm,
really difficult world.
yeah.
Excuse me, got a cough. Much easier to come home from a busy day at the office or a busy day on Zoom, pour yourself a glass of wine while you're chopping the vegetables, going into the second and third shift of life. Much easier to do that, sip a little wine, than to get to your yoga class or to carve out half an hour to stretch and unwind in a different way.
Mm,
So it's very, to me, it's very clear what has happened. And then there's the final thing, which is because we deserve it. And that's where the mummy drinking thing
Yeah.
so upsets me, which is I had a hard day with my little 1-year-old. I deserve a drink. And that's no different than men and women in the 60s.
Mm.
Mommy's little helper.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And I can really relate to what you said there about the, getting ready for the afternoon shift, if you like, because that's what I did. I would, be working from home during the morning, and then I get my kids from school at 2 o'clock, and then 2:30 would come, and I would have a beer to get me like the transition from the morning to the afternoon shift, because there's so much to do and stuff to be getting on with and the kids to entertain, and it was just so normal. I think that was it didn't occur to me to listen to myself, to my body, to what I really needed and do that instead. It was just, oh well, I'll just have a beer because that's what everybody does, or wine or gin or whatever your drink of choice was. And I think that's part of the issue. I don't know how you feel about that. It's just because it's so normal, it's what everybody does. And if you decide, oh, well, I don't want to do that anymore, maybe I do want to go to a yoga class or have a stretch or read a magazine or have a nap, then it's kind of, oh, like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to drink? Do you
Yes.
find that?
Yes, I was talking to the woman who introduced the low risk drinking guidelines in Canada recently. I know we're going to talk about that. And
Yeah.
she said, we live in a culture that actually stigmatizes those who don't drink. You know,
Yeah.
why are you not drinking? Is there something wrong? Are you sick? All those questions. We have so normalized drinking
Mm.
that the reverse is, and we all know that the questions that you get asked, as you enter a party. And my number one rule with when I'm counseling people who are new to sobriety is always have a drink in your hand. Never never get others to beg the question, because it gets tiresome.
Yeah, it does. And you don't want to be, explaining yourself every 5 minutes when you're in a party or any social event. So that is such a good thing to do, to already have a drink, because people don't necessarily know what's inside the glass, do they? As long as you've got
No.
something, then that's usually good enough for them. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. But I just want to finish with something that I think is really, I'm a feminist, and we are in the middle of an enormous multiple decade revolution in terms of women's lives. And we all know that. And
Mm,
women outpace men now in university enrollment.
mm,
And they go toe to toe in the workplace. They also still carry the lion's share of
yeah.
the emotional baggage of raising children, looking after elderly parents, all the
Mm,
things that go hand in hand with being female. No wonder we need a decompression tool. No wonder that is important.
yeah.
So I think that has to be a major part of the discussion. And when we put down the glass, that's empowerment.
Mm.
No longer are we sitting numbing out or waking with a hangover or under functioning. But we actually can re-engage with ourselves, and we have agency.
We absolutely do. Um, But from my own experience and other people I've talked to, the thought of it is often the thing that makes it so scary and impossible at some point, because of the messaging, I think, that we receive the whole time, that sober is boring, it's difficult, you're going to struggle, you're going to have to go to meetings for the rest of your life, you're always going to have a problem. So the thought of it makes it challenging to even want to try and get there. But yeah, as you and I know, once you're on the other side of it, it is total liberation and empowerment. And from my own experience, I wonder why I didn't do it long before I actually got round to it. So a couple of questions. Was that your kind of perception of sobriety before you took those steps to get there? And also, without spoiling the book, what led you to do something about your drinking in the first place?
I'm, for 12 years, was it 12 or was it 10? Doesn't really matter. I carried around Carolyn Knapp's book, Drinking a Love Story.
Mm.
I love that book. There wasn't a lot of quit lit. I'm in my 15th year of sobriety. However, her gorgeous book was there, and in it is a quiz. And I would do it every year, and realize that my drinking was progressing. My drinking was progressing, and it wasn't until I became vice principal of McGill University in Montreal. Moved to Montreal, do not speak French, French-speaking city, all by myself. My son had left the country to go to school. My fiance lived in thousands of miles away. And excuse me, my drinking really ramped up.
Mm.
And in the end, my son and my best friend confronted me, as well as my partner. I quit drinking because I had to.
Mm.
I quit drinking because I knew I was going to fall down some stairs and have an unglamorous death. I quit drinking because my mother never did. And I grew up with a drinking mother, and I promised myself that if my family confronted me, I would do something about it.
Mm. Mm.
It was extremely difficult, and I thought my life would be where fun went to die.
Yeah.
I would never have champagne at my wedding, which everybody says. And in fact, the reverse is true.
It is. It's so true. And it takes a really brave person, I think, to step into the unknown, as it were, to disregard all the things that we've been told, by the market, by the alcohol companies, by our drinking buddies, that, as you just said, it's a death sentence, but it's really, really not. I know with obviously 15 years of alcohol freedom that you've got such a huge amount of experience. What would you say is the best thing about being alcohol free?
How wonderful. What a beautiful question. I think that the main thing is that we get to be our authentic selves.
Yeah.
We make friends with ourselves again. And, people think, terrific, I'll return to my real self. No, it's not what happens. We evolve.
Mm.
And you get to leave the things about yourself that you don't like. So for me, that was workaholism, workaholism. Yeah. And we get to choose what we want to do. For me, that was going after a fellowship to write about women and drinking. It was writing my book, Drink, after which I said I felt the most Anne I had ever felt.
Yeah.
So I think that's the great joy.
Yeah, it is. And I want to ask you about that. When you stopped drinking, that you then pursued the fellowship to write the book. How was the process of writing the book? Do you think it helped aid your recovery? Was it a healing process that you did when you wrote the book?
Oh, yes. So healing. I believe that when we put words on the page, when we actually pause to really think about what we want to say, we metabolize our own history. And so I'll give a little backstory. I spent 40 years as a journalist, mostly as an editor, mostly helping other famous people sound even better. Margaret Atwood, Michael Ignatieff, people like that, Carol Shields. And I didn't have the microphone enough myself. I did have a column, but here I was writing, seizing the microphone myself, as we do when we write, to say, explore, quiz the whole issue about women and drinking. And I couldn't be more fascinated. And what I discovered was so often we're self-medicating. Mood disorders, trauma, you name it, workaholism, anything that's really challenging. And so women end up in their homes alone. Men tend to go to bars, hang out with maybe a different crowd. Women tend to have a ritual that is their own, hang out by themselves. When I went to rehab, there were women who would say, oh yeah, I drank in my bedroom, or to hide from my family, or I drank in the kitchen. Or I went to book club and drank exactly what everybody else drank, and then came home and opened a bottle of wine and drank by myself. Women tend to be isolated drinkers with a ritual, and that's a very important part of it. So when I stopped, not only did I write my book, but I did my TED Talk, which now has 1.4 million viewers, and really talked about, with some outrage, about how much the alcohol marketing had been focused on women for very, very mercenary reasons, and how we had really gotten it all wrong.
Yeah. So what can we do about it, Anne? The
Well,
$1,000,000 question.
Yeah. What I think is amazing. So I've talked about some of the bad news. What I think the good news is people like you are having podcasts. People all over the world are forming groups. So I'm a host on something called Ola Sober out of Madrid, which is an international group for just women. I'm a host on Friday mornings. I love it. There's Laura McCown's The Luckiest Club. There are options for people. When I got sober, you were walking down the stairs of a church basement to drink bad coffee and 12-step. I'm not dissing 12-step. I spent 7 years getting sober, got sober in 12-step. But I love the fact that there are options. There are options. There's Quitlet. There are many things to support us, and a community starting to really recover out loud. When I recovered out loud in my book, Drink, it was very, very rare.
Yes.
The world is changing.
Yeah, it is.
Free drinks, right? That we didn't have when I started my sobriety journey. You certainly didn't have the wealth of options that you do now.
No, and I think that's so important. Personally, I'm not, into that at all. I'm just like a cup of tea. That's great for me. But I also think it's so important, because just because we're not drinking, it doesn't mean that we can't enjoy a nice drink. So thankfully, there are beautiful alcohol-free drinks out there now, because I think in the past we were made to feel like second class, I suppose, not catered for, not thought of, because we weren't drinking. I remember a friend of mine, she's alcohol-free about 8 months before me, and she went to Christmas with her family, and even her mum overlooked the fact that she wasn't drinking and said, oh, just have the Fanta that the kids are having. And she was like, no, I don't want Fanta. I want something better. Thankfully, we do have something better now.
We really do. We have lots of options. I'm like you, not really a fan of those drinks. It's not what I choose, but I'm glad they exist. They are really important to a lot of people, and making those people feel seen and heard. And so the world is shifting. It's very, very interesting the way the world is shifting.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I want to talk a bit more about writing now and the writing process. Obviously, as well as being an amazing journalist and best-selling author, you also help people with their own writing to recovery. And you've got a course coming up soon, haven't you, Anne?
I do. Thank you for mentioning it. Yes. I teach a course or invented a course called Writing Your Recovery, and that could be recovery from anything, grief, substance, bulimia. I'm just citing a great variety of people who have been in my class. It's for women only, because I believe that women share differently in the rooms when they're together without a male view. And it is an 8-week course, 2 hours a week, where I designed this course I wanted when I chose to write a book.
Yeah.
How do you get an agent? How do you get published? How do you begin? We begin with quilt squares, little wee scenes that might be 750 words. How do you develop a habit of writing? What if you think your story is too small to tell? No one's story is too small to tell. And it's very kinetic. So it tends to be only between, I would say, 8 and 14 people in a class. So you get to know the other women. You get to know, meet Holly Whitaker or Laura McCown or another writer in the class who comes for a visit. You meet my agent. You get a sense of the whole world. But most of all, you hear yourself. And I'm a somatic, went back to school at 64 to become a psychotherapist. And I bring that knowing to the class. And I really believe our bodies hear us when we take the time, pay attention to our own stories, and begin to do that filtering, metabolizing of what happened to us. What was rock bottom? What led to it? What was your history? What really predated and therefore even forecast that you might have trouble? What's life like now? It's so much fun working with these various women, and the stories are really different. And some have even gone to fiction, some have gone to poetry, some just journal a lot. It is really fun. So we have a new course starting on the 29th of March. There are 2 options: a daytime option, mostly for the European and UK market, or like a midday in North America, and then we have the evening as well.
Okay. We put all the details of that in the show notes so that people can sign up for that. Exciting. Would you say that writing then is your favorite tool on the sober journey, or do you have other things that I know 15 years is, you're not in it like you were at the beginning, but it's a lifestyle choice, I believe. So what else do you do that supports this lifestyle that you have now?
I believe number one, by far, I can only speak as a woman, is community, is being with others. However you do it. You can do it, in my Writing Your Recovery group. You can do it as part of Ola Sober or wherever you belong, 12-step. But you need to realize, you need to actually get over the shame, because I think shame and guilt are useless emotions. They have to be dealt with, and move forward with your new life. So for me, here's what I do. I get up every morning and I write a gratitude list. And this is really important, as per Melody Beattie, not just for the good stuff, not for the foam on my coffee, not for the point I'm talking to you only, but also I'm going through heartache. I know that's a signal that I have loved well and been loved. So I try to get up every day and write something quite different from the day before. In other words, I don't repeat 5 things. 5th is always Friday. And I send that to 2 sober writers, and they send theirs back to me. And so that's how I begin my day. And the other thing obviously is I'm part of the Ola Sober community, and I write a lot myself. I'm writing a new book, and it feeds me. It feeds me too. I often say I don't know what I think about something until I sit down and put it through my metaphorical typewriter.
Mm.
So it's a way to pause and know yourself, pause and hear yourself, pause and think about life. Right.
Yeah, that's so important, the pause that you just mentioned there, because so often we rush through life, we rush through days. That was certainly my thing, rushing through the morning. And then when it's the afternoon, you've got no capacity left, that you just want to numb out. Or you rush through the day at work, you get to the end of the day, the kids have gone to bed, you finally get a chance to sit down, and we want instant cancelling of everything, I suppose, shutting off. We just want to close our minds and relax, like right now, because it's the whole rushing, I think, throughout the days. And I love the idea of pause. One thing that I try to do is pause throughout the day as often as I can. I meditate now twice a day. And if you'd said
Oh,
that beforehand, I would have been, no, there's absolutely no way I can do that. But I find it really important now, because I can step back and stop and sit. And like you said, it's so important to allow things to come up, to feel things, to think things, without trying to just squash them away and get on to the next task. So
right.
that's, for me, pausing and slowing down, I think, is important. Like you said at the beginning, you're no longer a workaholic like you used to be. So that's changed a lot. Do you think, Anne, that because everything is just so fast paced and we need it now and want it yesterday, that it's part of the problem with our society, I suppose, and why we tend towards drinking?
Oh, yes. I think it is an instant way to take your shoulders, dislodge them from your earlobes and,
Yeah.
relax. It's instant. And we all
Mm,
know that. And I think we would be remiss not to say alcohol's fun. It works. It is an interesting, complex substance. Um, but I think it is true that we want the quick fix. I think I've really noticed even in the 10 years since Drink came out, our attention spans are different. When I'm coaching my writers, I say,
mm,
there's the beckoning finger of Netflix. There's the beckoning finger of social media. You have to find a way to captivate your reader so they won't close the book and put it down. So
yeah.
this is much more challenging than it used to be.
Mm, yeah.
Far more challenging.
It is. It is. So what about your new book then, Anne? Can you give us a little insight as to what it's about?
Yes, I will. I am very interested and curious. I've been meeting sober women in groups, and I gave a recent talk in Palm Springs. And what people come to me about when they've read Drink is to say, I loved your book. I want to know what happened. I want to know how you stayed sober. How
Mm,
did you manage this? Because I was only 4 years sober when I wrote Drink. And so that is, from my point of view, early days. And I think it takes us till we're 5 years to really, really, really digest everything and have made life choices that are different. So I think that, and if anyone listening is in early sobriety, that's not to be in any way negative, but just to say there are good things ahead. You have a
yes.
lot of agency that when you put down the glass. So I am putting together a book that is meant for sober people. Exploring what it means to sustain a really healthy recovery, to sustain the habits, the things that you just asked me about that go into a healthy recovery, things that make it so precious and so valuable.
Yes. Oh, I like that. Sounds so interesting and exciting.
Thank you.
And quite relevant for me because at the end of this month, I will be 5 years alcohol free.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow.
I know. I'm going to have to think of a special way to celebrate, extra cake, probably.
You know, I will just offer you something. I always buy myself something, even if it's small. So it could be a book.
Yeah.
When I turned 8, I bought a little ring with 8 stones on it because I remember that that's 8. When I turned 11, I bought some earrings. In a gem that I really feel aligned to as a writer. So I think you should mark it. 5 years is significant. Mark it with something other than more cake. That's my humble.
I will. Thank you. Thank you. Because celebrating is so important on this journey, isn't it?
Oh my goodness, your milestones. When I turned 14, I published a list of 14 things that I had learned. And I think number 12, or maybe it's 13, is mark your anniversaries. Make them big days. Involve your families or your friends, or do something very special that day as if it is your birthday, because it is.
Yeah,
It's your soberversary.
Yeah, it is. You're so right. I often get my clients to keep a little like celebration book and to write down each and every small moment, every win, every celebration, every, joyous thing that happens, even if it's waking up and feeling good because you're not hungover. And it helps to support the fact that sober is actually really amazing and should be celebrated every step of the way and not looked at as a bad thing or a shameful thing or a secretive thing anymore. I'm really proud that I don't drink, and I try to help the women I work with feel proud as well, because it's no small thing, is it, Anne?
No. It's that first year is not for the faint of heart.
No.
It's very challenging in this culture to, face down your friend who says, well, I didn't think your problem was that large. Or your family members who may continue to drink in front of you. There are many hurdles, and it's a lot to be proud of.
It is. And some of the hurdles, and we've touched on it already, is obviously the marketing of the alcohol by the alcohol industry itself, and the lack of support, I think, as well, and the fact that we're the ones who are seen to be at fault somehow, that we can't handle it, that we're weak in some way because we haven't got the constitution and we can't, take a pint without any problem. Which brings me on to the question about what Canada are doing with the guidelines. What are the guidelines, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us what they are?
It's really interesting. After several years of looking at the scientific evidence, lowest drinking guidelines were announced in Canada in the middle of what for many was dry January. And they landed with a thud because it goes like this: 2 drinks a week, 2 measured drinks a week. So for wine drinkers, that would be 5 ounces, 5 measured ounces of not a lot of wine twice a week is the only safe way to drink. That is very low. Then 3 to 6, moderate risk, and then 6 onwards, high risk for various cancers, for cardiac issues,
Mm.
and any number of other illnesses. So this landed with a terrible thud, as you can imagine. The population really pushed back. The notion was Canada's the place where fun has gone to die. And people, I think I did about 70 interviews, media interviews around them, and people just generally said, no, I can't do that. And yet there's a lot of conversation. What is interesting is that there is a lot of chat about, I know this isn't good for me. Whereas the last low risk drinking guidelines that said 10 drinks a week for a woman, 15 for a man, in 2011, I broke that story, and people didn't really absorb that this was connected to cancer, even though it's in my book. 15% of breast cancer cases are attributable to alcohol. Only 5% of women understood that. So I think we're getting into a very interesting place where people are accepting that there are ramifications to using alcohol in a way they didn't before. Is it the new tobacco? No, not really. But it took 30 years between the announcement on tobacco's dangers and how we shifted, banning it from restaurants, banning it from offices and airplanes, etc. Sounds funny. I think it's going to take a generation for people to really change.
And do you think that's the issue? Do you think people just really don't get it? Do you think that we just don't understand, even though you may have woken up with a hangover from hell, we still don't understand that it's bad for us? Or do we not want to believe it because of, the fun times that it allows us to have?
We have so absorbed the marketing. This is the only way to have fun. This is the only way to go on a date.
Yeah.
This is the only way to celebrate, relax, reward yourself after a long day at the office. We've so absorbed that messaging. It's like wallpaper. We don't even see it, whether it's in the movies or it's on television or it's alcohol marketing itself. We're just so, it's like wallpaper. It's the water we swim in, whatever metaphor you use. And therefore, it's going to take a real revolution. And I think we're in the revolution. I think that's the good news. I think it started.
Yeah.
For things to really shift.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like Ireland. I don't know if you've heard about Ireland or the Republic of Ireland. They're proposing warnings on alcohol labels, like on the cigarette labels, saying those things. I'll just try if I can read them out. There's a link between alcohol and cancers. They want that to be one of the warnings. Causes risk to the fetus during pregnancy. That's another warning they want. And alcohol causes liver disease. Again, that's another warning that they're pushing to get on labels. And the alcohol industry is not surprisingly pushed back about that proposed legislation. Do you think things like that, labeling and also guidelines, are helping us to be more, I don't want to use the word responsible because it's an addictive substance. You can't really be responsible. Right. You can't moderate it. But do you think it's opening our eyes a little bit more to what alcohol really is? Or is it just the government seem to be doing their bit, if you like?
Well, it's interesting because Canada is, this news out of Canada has had something like 6 billion around the world, 6 billion people absorb the news, really widespread, international. attention. And like Ireland, they also suggested, the people who did the guidelines said, we want standard warning labels, just like Ireland. And we also want a standard message on each bottle that says how many servings are in this bottle. Of course, the alcohol industry is furious. And it's really important to know that the alcohol industry, with its deep pockets, will take the United States, because my data is best out of the United States. For every person representative on Capitol Hill in Washington in the US, there are 2 alcohol lobbyists. They give generously and they give across party lines. They are a powerful industry.
Yeah.
They are not going to have any part of, in Canada, wanting this to unfold. In fact, we had a terrific experiment with alcohol labeling, warning labels, excuse me, in Northern Canada, and the alcohol industry insisted after 6 months that it be stopped. So, and it did show a shift in alcohol consumption. So we're dealing with what I call the levers of change that are so important, and they are accessibility of alcohol. Is it in your grocery store beside your milk and your water? Yes, in many countries.
Yeah.
Is it heavily marketed? Yes, around the world. And cost. Yeah. What is the cost? And I remember reporting out of the UK, for instance, that alcohol in some cases was cheaper than water or milk.
Yeah.
in the local grocery store. Dirt cheap.
Yeah.
All these levers, we know education doesn't work. We know those 3 levers really work.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are we to do then, Anne, if you are sober curious, or you're on the path already and you want to quit drinking? How do we stay in our lane when everything's going on around us, enticing us, bullying us, bombarding us, shaming us, all the rest of it? How do we, stay grounded and centered, true to ourselves, and just go where we want to go?
Well, I think, as I said, the good news is there's a lot of support. Yeah. There are a gazillion options for coaching, for any kind of support in groups. And with Zoom, you can go to a group. I go to groups in Ireland. I go to groups in California, and I'm in Toronto, Canada. So here is what I always advise, and I have many clients wrestling or sober curious, as you say. You start a journal. Start a journal, and you write down in the morning, tonight I'm going to have 1 drink, or tonight I'm going to have 0 drinks, or tonight I'm going to have 3 drinks. And you keep it for a week, and you see how often you can keep to your word. That's what I did. And I really realized I couldn't keep my promise to myself. By 5 o'clock, I was always changing the goal. So that's number 1. Number 2, I want you to privately say, am I using it to numb or forget a traumatic or an upsetting thing? Even if that upsetting thing is, I work too hard, and at the end of the day, I need a quick instant. As a client of mine said, the fun had to happen fast. She didn't have a big window, single mom, finishes her day. It was way faster in terms of enjoying herself to just have that drink. So I think you make it conscious. You make it conscious, you make community, and you see if you can either moderate or quit. But at least I always say, you know how to do your downward dog, you know how to count calories. So just count your drinks. The first thing's to become aware.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or aware of the support out there.
Yeah, because I think that awareness and that consciousness is so important, because often it is not just, but it is a habit. It's something we do automatically, something we do without thinking. Before we know it, we're in front of the fridge, or before we know it, we go to get another glass and suddenly the bottle's empty. We don't know, how did that happen? So that awareness, I think, is such a great starting point, because if you want to change something, you have to know what it is that you're changing to begin with. And
Yeah. I
just,
mean, you're right. Start with your measuring cup.
yeah,
Learn what 5 ounces of wine looks like.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And what do we do if it gets hard? What's been the thing that helped you the most in the early days when it was hard? How do we keep going?
I used to say that it wasn't one day at a time. It was one morning at a time, one afternoon, one evening, or even 1 hour.
Mm,
Um, I drew on a lot of supports. I remember being in a party and visiting the women's washroom more than 3 or 4 times just
yeah,
to breathe,
yeah,
to remove myself from the pressure, but begin to take note of all the blessings of sobriety, which include, for me as a writer, reader, I could go to bed and read a book when I was drinking, and I'd have to reread the same words the next day because I didn't know what I'd read.
yeah.
Um, so there's so many blessings of being alert. You have a lot of time on your hands. You
You
have a lot of time
do.
on your hands that you weren't using well, I would argue, or to your best advantage. You weren't shaping your life in a way that lost hours.
Yeah,
Going to bed too late. Sleep has become my big friend.
yeah.
Um, we don't sleep well when we drink. We
No.
tend to get up in the middle of the night and all that sugar is coursing through your veins,
Mm,
and your mornings don't tend to be great because of hangovers. So
mm,
flip the switch and look at all the blessings that come with
yeah,
a different life, a more aware life. And then you can make choices. You do have agency that you do not have when you're drinking.
yeah, yeah. That's so true. Thank you, Anne. What a lovely way to end the conversation. Inspiring, uplifting, with a little bit of joy. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I guess I would, there's a poem at the beginning of my book called The Laughing Heart. And if I recommended anything, I would go get that poem, go on YouTube. Tom Waits, the musician, reads it. It's beautiful.
We put the link for that in the show notes.
And the last line is the gods wait to delight in you. And I think that when we stop drinking and we become ourselves,
Yeah,
the gods delight in us. I
yeah,
believe that.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. That's so lovely. Absolutely lovely. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for putting up with my cold.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's such a treat. Such a treat to talk about my favorite subject. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.